Using Wi-Fi without NordVPN could mean sharing your private stuff with more people than you think. NordVPN. Online security starts with a click.
The world has failed, I tell you. The world has failed yet again.
Just to introduce you, you are the Deputy Leader for the Irish Freedom Party. Tom,
that's correct.
Tom Luongo. Tom and I have been doing these videos together pretty much every month for over 6 years. And he is, in my opinion, a political commentator and analyst par excellence. Just really great.
Excellent.
And Michael, I know
it is great to have these people here who are prepared to do the research that everybody needs, because you're not going to get it in mainstream media, unfortunately.
Yes.
And we need people to get us the facts, let us know exactly what's going on with our financial systems and our health systems. Now I'm just trying to set up my stand here, so I put this down for a moment.
I'm doing that because I know today's been a big day in Dublin. I've been watching on Twitter. Yes. Big demonstration in Dublin against the open borders policy.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So it's there has been a big demonstration. The elections are on in sort of 4.5 weeks' time, so this is the last big rally before those elections. And it was a great opportunity to demonstrate. There's a great deal of anger against what's happening in the country. People are finally waking up to it, which is the big relief, I think. People like me have been just flabbergasted at how closed-minded people have been for so long. I think one of the things that brought it to mind to people's minds, though, was the COVID disaster. People are now realizing that so many of their relatives and friends were permanently damaged by what went on, and they're beginning to wake up to it, and they're beginning to dread that the same thing may come again. So that certainly did clarify things in a number of people's minds. But look, immigration in Ireland is off the scale. It is at a level which is higher than in any other European country at the moment, and certainly one of the highest in recorded history, far higher than the United States at its peak of immigration. The number of foreign-born people in Ireland now is at a level, in the age group 19 to 39, it is 33% of the people in this country were born outside the country.
And recent arrivals, that's the other thing, and recent arrivals, and not when the economy is expanding, they're not coming to jobs or anything, and they're mostly men.
Yes, I thought that's well. They're mostly men, and they come in, and then, of course, they have a right to reunify their families. And most immigrants who come in here and get status will bring an average 12 people after them. So it's it is only a matter of a very short period of time that the island of Ireland, the Irish people, the native Irish people, will be in a minority. That's going to happen very, very quickly.
Michael, what I want to do, because people can listen to the interview that you and I did, and we covered this, right? And they can follow you on all links in the description below. But what I'm conscious of is I thought it'd be a good idea to bring both of you together, because I think Tom, in his blog post, tomluongo.me, and to his Patreon members and his Slack members and stuff, he talks about what's going on in the background of the EU and the euro in terms of its perilous, parlous, horrific financial position that the mainstream media just don't talk about. Like in the UK, UK is doing really, really badly because of Brexit. Are you kidding? Are you kidding? Right? You don't talk about what a terrible state EU is in. And you're running as an MEP in the elections in June.
Yes. And
like you and I, and Tom, we all share the same sentiments. Tom, I voted Brexit. Tom is an American, but he supported Brexit, right, from across the water. So I wanted to have that conversation about the financial situation, because you asked me about that as well.
Yes. And I think in Ireland, I mean, we had a number of economic crises down the years, and a lot of people felt that once we were united to the euro, we would be in a permanently stable currency. And of course, that was entirely tied to the German Deutschmark, but Germany is now rapidly deindustrializing. Nord Stream being one of the primary factors, and the fact that there's a third world war about to break out on their border being a secondary factor. But people as well, they're not aware of the extent of derivative inflation of the currency that has taken place. I was at a seminar last week where I think the indication was that the total value of all derivatives in the world is approximately 4 times the total value of all the assets in the world, and is heading for an eightfold inflation. So it does appear to be a complete Ponzi scheme organised by high finance as a means of acquiring all the assets and all the capital and all the things in the world. That seems to be what's coming down the tracks. We still have this vision of the euro being a strong currency. It was based on the German economic model, and the Germans, like the Scottish, once you get a reputation for hard work, you can do whatever, you can sleep in as long as you want in the morning, and I think there's a certain element of that there as well with the Germans. You have a reputation for probity and organisation, which is not really merited.
It's gone by the by. So, Tom, do you want to tell us how bad it really is that the media doesn't cover, doesn't talk about? And my impression from you, Tom, it's hopeless. It's absolutely hopeless.
Well, simply because I don't believe that the United States is willing to fund it anymore. See, the biggest issue here is that the German economic miracle post World War II is all based on the building of the offshore dollar markets, what known nominally as the euro dollar markets, and the euro dollar markets are absolutely in the crosshairs of Jerome Powell, who realizes that this keeps the Federal Reserve from being able to actually prosecute monetary policy on behalf of the United States. We have to always consider the world because we're the global reserve currency, and the euro dollar markets actually swamp domestic dollar markets, and because of that, they can't. That when the Fed decides to lower or raise interest rates, it has to basically it's a suggestion to the euro dollar markets. Is that okay? Can we do that? Because everything used to be indexed to LIBOR, and now American debt is no longer indexed to LIBOR. It's indexed to
for people who don't know. Because Michael, I hope you'll be making this video available to your supporters and stuff. But LIBOR was the overnight bank rate that was decided.
The London interbank offer rate, which was what everything was all kind of debt contracts were indexed to. So your mortgage, your car loan, your teaser rate, your interest rate swap, whatever it was all quoted, relative to LIBOR or some derivative of LIBOR. Well, for U.S. debt, that's not the case anymore. It hasn't been the case since the beginning of 2022. In the SOFR market, SOFR, which is the secured overnight financing rate, is now the law of the land in the United States. It's what trades on a daily basis. We no longer trade euro dollar futures. We trade SOFR futures, 3-month SOFR futures. And because of that, now the cost of dollars worldwide is dependent upon the cost of dollars internally within the U.S. and no longer how they're trading through the global markets through the City of London, as expressed through LIBOR and City of London. So if the U.S. was getting into, its economy was overheating, or we had inflation, or this or that, and the Fed needed to raise interest rates, well, if that meant that, the London banks got into trouble, or the Frankfurt banks got in trouble, or the Dutch banks got in trouble, or the Singaporean banks got in trouble by extension, or whatever, then LIBOR would start to blow out. That would force American mortgages, American variable rate debt, to blow out as well. So if you've got a mortgage that's quoted as a variable rate mortgage at LIBOR plus 3%, for example. Well, if LIBOR goes from 2% to 7% when the Fed raised from 2% to 3%, well, guess what? Your interest rate, your variable rate mortgage is now 9%. Guess what? You now can no longer afford your mortgage. You stop spending. The economy in the U.S. slows down, and so the Fed can never really raise interest rates to wring out the malinvestment from the previous cycle. They always had to cut rates prematurely, go back closer and closer and closer. So eventually, we got the 2008 global financial crisis, zero bound rates for 10 years, and everything else that's happened. Now, Europe, in response to that, went to negative interest rates. And the ECB pushed rates so low for so long that at one point we had somewhere between $14 to $16 trillion of European sovereign debt trading at a negative nominal yield. And now that the Powell has raised interest rates back to 5%, and to maintain the fiction in some ways, as Michael was saying, that the euro is a better and more stable currency, and an economic geography block that was stabler than the United States, given the current political hoo-ha going on in our neck of the woods. It will allow for European debt to trade at a discount or at a premium, i.e., at a lower yield than comparable U.S. debt. So, for example, this is why the German Bund is still trading at 2.5%. Italian debt's trading at 10 years trading at 4%. Spanish debt 3%, 3.5%, French debt 3%, yada, yada, yada. But even that is a problem because remember, those bonds were trading at near zero just 2 years ago. The holes in the balance sheets of the banks that have the sovereign debt on their balance sheets in order to have levered up and liquefied the banking system and underwritten all these loans and everything else that's out there. Well, I got news for you: the banks are all asset or all reserve impaired. And that's not saying that the American banks aren't, but the American banks, well, they have the Federal Reserve on their side; they can do that. European banks don't. They don't. The ECB is not that kind of bank. It's a different bank than the Federal Reserve is, and because of that, what's happening is that the leverage that existed within the Eurodollar markets is reversing rapidly. And without the ability to force the Fed back to the zero bound, Europe has no other option but to default. So then the question is, how do you default? Well, you can default openly and nobody will ever trust you with their money ever again. Or you can gin up a war with Russia and or the Middle East, get the Americans to fight it for you, and then everybody in a fit of righteous anger at the Russians for violating the territorial sovereignty of Ukraine default on all the debt. Because it's their fault. We had to go fight this war we couldn't afford and blah, 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 blah. But they were always planning on defaulting on the debt anyway. They were never going to pay your pensions. They were never going to pay out on insurance and everything else. It was never going to happen. They were always planning on doing this. George Soros wrote article after article that the only way for the European Union to get out from underneath all of this was to go for fiscal integration. But first they had to default on the debt, issue consols, permanent debt, say a quarter point, half point, in perpetuity, just like the British did multiple times in the last 300 years. And that's the model. And that's what they plan on doing. And that's why Europe will not walk away from Ukraine. That's why Ursula von der Leyen is out there today saying Russia winning in Ukraine is an existential problem for Europe. And it's why David Cameron is giving Ukraine the green light to use British Storm Shadow missiles on Russian targets inside Russia, to which the Russians have allegedly responded saying, oh, by the way, that makes Britain a target.
Yep. Well,
and it's putting everybody at risk. But it's all about the money. It's all about that and their grand plan of fiscal integration of the EU, and then turn everything over to the UN and to morph NATO into, it's that whole Agenda 2030, 2050 thing that they've been talking about for years. Nothing new.
Yeah, one of the things that I was looking at when we had the major financial crash in Ireland, 2008, 2012, was the re-establishment of a new currency in Ireland. We had our currency, of course, when we joined the euro in 1997, 1998. And, there would be certain difficulties with that. We of course, incurred this enormous European banking debt because the banks had been dumping money on Ireland hand over fist for the previous 5 years. They had excess funds and they created an absolutely ridiculous poverty boom in Ireland. And all of the local Irish banks went bust, having borrowed money from the German, primarily from the German and French banks. And then the Irish government utterly stupidly, agreed to bail those banks, bail the bondholders out, and incurred a massive 68 billion euro debt, which we would probably never be able to pay. But at the time, I felt, look, what we need to do is this is not our debt. This is European banking debt. This is the euro debt. Walk away from the euro and try to establish a new currency. It wouldn't be easy, this would be, we would be attacked roundly by the European Central Bank, of course, if we did that. But it was probably the only thing we could have done, in my opinion. We're trapped now, as in the words of Yeats, we're trapped to a sick and dying animal, which is the euro currency and an unstable European Union. But do you think that, how will they sell fiscal union? How will they sell, a single monetary block? I mean, this is something
Michael, sadly, they have to literally destroy the economy and make everybody beg for, oh, well, no, I know you don't have any money. It's okay. We're going to put this money into your digital, on your wallet, on your iPhone. But you have to accept total surveillance. You have to accept this. You have to accept all these other things. But we're going to put enough money into your wallet to, buy groceries and feed your children and all the rest of it. That's what they plan on doing. The model, by the way, for 2000, the model for 2008 for dealing with the European Union was Iceland. Iceland told everybody to go scratch. They told the British banks to go scratch. They told everybody to go scratch. And eventually, they held their water, and nobody could do anything about it. And the Icelandic Parliament, told them no, and that's the end of it. And that's what caused Northern Rock to fail, and blah blah. It was just, but it was what it was.
Yeah, I remember David Cameron at the time pretty much threatening Iceland. But what could he do short of launching a bloody invasion against him? What the hell could he do? Very little, But
I'm actually surprised they didn't.
Yes,
to be honest.
Given the way Cameron was selling at the time, I'm slightly surprised as well, because Iceland is, of course, a tiny country, but the optics wouldn't have been very good with that for Britain to invade Iceland. It wouldn't have been a very, very good.
I think what happened is that the Americans just bailed them out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's what I think happened. They just called up Bernanke, and eventually they got their way anyway.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you. I think that's what happened. Because I hate to to be the bearer of bad news, but we're in many ways the United States is still a British colony.
Yeah,
especially at the financial level.
Just to expand on what you were saying, Tom, and Tom, you asked Michael, which is the destruction of farming. That's part and parcel of it, because it destroys our self-sufficiency, makes us dependent upon the state. Then also the climate change agenda. It's spending all this money on boondoggles that allow for people to be centrally controlled and rob them of their independence. And part of this whole movement, there's a restaurant in North London that serves insect food. So they're going to destroy all of that, offer us rationing and bugs to eat, but we have to have a digital wallet with a CBDC, and that's going to make things better. Well, yeah, and at the same time, they're also going to, and this is absolutely part of the plan as well. And it's monstrous, and it's silly, and it's ill-conceived, and I think it's dumb, and I don't think anybody's going to stand for it. But then again, they might. If they get the goal is to get people so desperate they'll do anything.
Yeah, but that's when people have no resources and no ability to feed their families, they will do anything. And when people are frightened, as you saw during COVID, they will do anything. They will listen to the nonsense that's being perpetrated at them from their television screens, and they'll believe it. And they'll believe the government, which sounds plausible. They will believe their health authorities, despite all the best evidence that they have, and despite the very learned alternative voices that were there. They went along with the herd. There was a herd mentality there, and I think that's when you say people won't stand for it, what ability will they have to resist? In reality, that's the big question. But do you think it would have been possible for Ireland in that situation, Tom, to have established an alternative currency?
I'll be honest with you, Michael. I'd love to be able to answer that question with any degree of certainty. I remember following it back. I remember following Iceland back in 2008. And that's the story I was following. I wasn't, and I wasn't a professional back then. I was just interested. I was still in learning mode right back then. So I would say no. I don't remember. I don't. Well,
Ireland was next up after Iceland, and we didn't follow their lead, unfortunately. We wanted to be good Europeans, and we took the hit, and we'll never pay that hit back. And
the Greeks are in the same problem. The Greeks are in the same position, and it's So the fiscal integration thing is going to be almost impossible for them to keep together, because the Italians don't want to go along with this. That's very clear. They don't want to go along with it. But Giorgia Meloni doesn't seem like the person to get that job done. And I wish she was, but she's not. Macron is all in. The Germans are neutered. They're being the Bundesbank. The Bundesbank is hanging on by the skin of its teeth. Otherwise, the Swiss National Bank wouldn't have cut interest rates last month. They did that to save the Bundesbank because apparently German banks are more exposed to American shoddy commercial real estate debt than Americans are, because they needed to get their 8% to pay those very generous pensions. And you have to. This is the thing, and when you go to the zero bound and you go to negative. Or even, in Europe's case, the negative bound, you're still promising people an 8% return on their money.
Yeah.
But the only way you get 8% in a zero bound environment is leverage. That's it.
Yeah.
And then you're gambling. And when the bill comes due, and as long as we stay at the zero bound, everything was fine. And I don't really think that they ever intended for Powell to get a second term. They went after Powell hard to get rid of him in 2021 when his term was up, and they failed. And then he's been on in his very mild-mannered kind of Jerome Powell way. He's like, well, we're going to do this, and that's what we're going to do. He's like George Lucas, the friggin' Federal Reserve chair. He just kind of mumbles under his breath and does his thing, and then he just kind of wanders away. And oh, by the way, I'm not cutting rates. That's it. Every press conference is kind of the same with Powell, and I don't understand why people don't understand him. It's really quite simple. They blackmailed him during COVID, but since then he's been out completely.
So do you believe, Tom, that the saber rattling, the refusal to come to the negotiating table Boris Johnson's intervention in Ukraine, do you think that's all to cover an imminent financial collapse?
Yes.
You think that's all
I think all of these conflicts have to be raised to some level, and they have to do so in such a way that they also take the United States down with it. I'm firmly convinced here that the old colonial impulse of the UK, or of the British, of England, let's make this clear, of England and France and Germany and the Netherlands and the colonial powers, they still see the United States as a colony. Mm-hmm. They want it back, and they also want everybody who's ever resisted their colonial rule crushed, and that would be the Russians and that would be the Americans. Mm-hmm. I'm dead serious when I say this. It's so clear as day when you watch it from the side of the pond at this point. Then you watch and you really watch the maneuverings of our domestic political leadership. You know, they're all in the tank for somebody else. They're all owned and operated by other people. Most of those people are in Europe and or China. There are very few people in the pay of the Russians. The Russians have no real influence in the United States other than some very mild propaganda. Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, just like we have almost zero presence inside Russia anymore because Putin threw us all out. Mm-hmm. So it's really about the Chinese, and I think that the European influence is far deeper than that of the Chinese because it's older. It goes back hundreds of years. Yep. The relationships between the European and especially the British, but the European and American, what's the word? Centers of capital. They're old. They go back to the founding of the colonies. They're still there. Yep. Whereas, the Chinese, it's all kind of, they're kind of nouveau riche in that respect. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's the way I would, it makes, and people just kind of look at me like I got four heads when I say stuff like this. And I'm like, do you really think that the history started in like 1947? Like, really? I don't, you know what I mean? I'm not the world's greatest historian, Michael, but I get that. And I get that up until like 1910, the British were our major enemies on this side of the pond. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, during Woodrow Wilson, we started adopting British foreign policy, British monetary policy, and Tom, British domestic policy.
Tom, if I can just say, because you and Alex Trainer have both been arguing this for a while, and I've been listening, not quite getting it, not sure I agree with it, but seeing how it plays out. And one of the things I can see for myself and for people who are watching this and don't get this, it's just an incredibly smart, devious, deceptive, evil, manipulative play by the UK to be in the background, pulling the strings, making it look like it's others. And do people really, really think that the English or the British imperial elite gave independence to their former colonies and then just cut all strings? No, that's it. No, that's not how elite imperialist classes work. It's not how it goes.
Well, then why Sykes-Picot? Right.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Tom.
I know you are. I'm talking to the metaphorical the part of the audience that may not be in all this. Why Pakistan, India? Right. Why the border? Why are all these places left with border zones, with border disputes and ethnic, with borders drawn that ensure ethnic strife? Why did the Ukraine fall apart? When the USSR fell, why did the Donbass not go back to the Russian Federation when they're all Russian?
Yeah.
Why did everybody east of the Dnieper River not go back to the Russian Federation? Didn't make any sense. I mean, I don't know. I'm able to say a lot of these things. I'm in the room with an Irishman, so
yeah, that's right.
Ireland is a classic example of a border that wasn't necessary.
Exactly. You understand exactly what I'm talking about. And then notice that during Brexit, what was the fake conflict that the EU ginned up during the entire thing, which was the Irish border?
Yeah.
And they did it on purpose.
They used the Irish border as a leverage against Britain to get out of it, and we allowed ourselves to be used in that fashion. I mean, there was an opportunity there for us to strike a permanent deal, which could have possibly distanced us from the European Union to some extent, which I advocated. But I'm afraid our politicians were far too tied to Europe to see where their own good lied, their own good lay. And that's very much a problem when you're part of a multinational organization, whether it's the UN or the European Union. You sacrifice your own interests, and certainly the smaller nations will sacrifice their own interests to the benefit of the bigger nations. Is the problem with the euro that it's over leveraged? I mean, is that really what you're saying?
The problem with the euro is that it now no longer has any collateral.
Yeah, and when it was set up, what was this collateral? What was
the collateral was that they get cheap gas from Russia. and they were getting cheap. They were getting cheap gas and oil from Russia. They still had some coal reserves that were coming out of Ukraine because all that coal in the Donbass was going west rather than east. So the way I like to put it, Michael, is that notice who's pounding the point that we have to get rid of hydrocarbons. The Europeans, who don't have any hydrocarbons. The Europeans, right? So when you look at it through that lens, and this is something that Alex Grainer is a mutual friend of mine and Rich's, he pointed it out to me in those terms, that it's about the collateral for the financial system. It's always energy. Our labor that they tax in order to fund the debt is still a first derivative in mathematic terms, or a second derivative of the amount of the cost of energy. So the euro's weakness at this point is that they have no control over the price of energy coming into the continent. One could argue, and I wouldn't say that I fully disagree with this argument, but I tend to think that this is more an own goal on the part of the European Union than it is any nefariousness on the part of the Americans, which is that the Americans forced the Europeans to give up Russian gas, when I think the Europeans walked into it willingly. Okay. The Americans didn't have to twist their arm very freaking hard to put ruinous sanctions on Russia, because they all gambled that the sanctions they put on in March of 2022 would be enough to collapse the Russian economy, affect regime change, and move forward. They were wrong. If they had been listening to me, because I said this back in 2015 when the Russians started divesting themselves of American debt, of the dollar back during the first ruble crisis, when oil crashed to $25 a barrel over the course of 2014 to 2015, I'm like, the Russians are decoupling from the Western markets, and they're never coming back.
You think that Putin anticipated this whole situation, that he didn't want to be vulnerable to sanctions? I mean, the spectacular failure of the sanctions. Okay, that was one thing, but the Nord Stream pipeline, that was more than just persuasion.
I was actually surprised that we went that route. I'll be honest with you, because and again, I think that the real actors there were the British and the Poles, not the Americans. I think the Americans gave them. I think American neoconservatives, which I consider a British foreign policy, an outgrowth of traditional British foreign policy, of Mackinder-esque foreign policy. I'm sure they gave them all the help in the world, the technical assistance, and I'm sure they gave them the green light, and everybody wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yeah, go ahead and do it. But I think the people who actually organized it, planned it, and executed it with the Poles and the Brits together, without a doubt. The intelligence, the mapping of it, all the rest of it. I just think that it was done because they were the ones who stood to gain the most from it. Because ultimately, the British get to drive a wedge between the United States and the EU. They get to hurt Russia, which is always a happy thing as far as 10 Downing Street and GCHQ are concerned. Like, this is, and then the Poles were, they, at that point in time, they were still thought that they had great powers behind them, i.e. the U.S. and the United Kingdom. And the reality is that they didn't. The Poles were being used for their Russophobia as the vector by which to foment all of this, because the Poles were used all during the construction of Nord Stream to try and stop Nord Stream. They were they were very instrumental in forcing the way Nord Stream was financed was all because of Polish intervention. Okay, it was Polish courts that refused to allow the joint venture between Gazprom and the 5 European majors that were supposed to all be joint stockholders in the original joint venture. It was supposed to be 50% owned by Gazprom and 50% owned by the 5 European majors: Renault, OMV, Shell, and a couple others. I can't remember the other, Uniper and one other, the Austrian one, whatever that one is. And that got the Poles put the kibosh on that. And eventually, that had to be that Gazprom had own the whole thing, and the other 5 countries basically companies gave them a loan for equivalent to 10% of the pipeline. And that's how it had to be done legally in order to get around the Polish complaint. So that was clearly British and American, pressure being put on the Polish government. And the Poles were, clearly the Law and Justice Party is, maps to Radek Sikorski and, Morawiecki and all the rest of them. They're clearly neoconservative, clearly in that camp, and still are. And Duda is still their representative, even within the Tusk government, the Donald Tusk current government, and even so, because it was Duda that was actually able to get Donald Trump to sign off on the latest round of Ukrainian aid. It was Duda that actually sent Trump got Trump over the line, because he went to Mar-a-Lago and got that done. Whereas Tusk is moving Poland back into the orbit of the EU, exactly what you would expect from when he was brought back into power, right? So And I think von der Leyen even came out today and said, we're ending the whole Article 7 complaint against Poland. Why? Well, because we have a Polish government that we now control.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's very cynical. I mean, the way the European Union operates is singling out a particular country and putting pressure on it until they control it. Hungary, I mean, this is what they did to Ireland. Whenever a Eurosceptic voice is raised in Ireland, as our party would, the question is also, well, you're seriously suggesting we should leave the European Union and we'd be isolated and a tiny country would be destroyed. But I'm trying to reframe the question into European Union should be abolished. We don't need this political and economic union. We'd be far better going back to simply a trading arrangement between the nation states and return power to the nation states and let them develop their own currencies. Let them develop their own currencies on the basis of their own resources, which they could be perfectly capable of doing, and they had not very long ago. But it's always phrased as 26 against 1 if one person stands up. And you have Orban is the only one who's managed to withstand that pressure for a very long period of time. He does have some other support occasionally, but he is the only one who's managed really to stand up against him. The Greeks didn't. We certainly didn't. The Poles now seem to be back in line. However, that was managed. I'm not sure, but
he's managed it. He's managed it because he never gave up the forint.
He never what? Sorry.
He never gave up the forint, the Hungarian forint. He never gave up his currency.
Yeah. Okay.
That's why.
Yeah, that's the key. Yeah, and that's what made us so weak. That not only would we be leaving a political union, we would have no currency. We'd have to go through the whole process of engaging other countries to accept a new currency from us, and that would be a difficult and slow process, especially when you have enemies, powerful enemies like France and Germany and Italy and Great Britain.
I'll be honest with you. I don't think George Maloney would stop you from leaving. But Macron and Olaf Scholz, without a doubt. Scholz because he's weak, and Annalena Baerbock and Robert Habeck actually run the country. And then you have the entire EU apparatus, and then worse than that, what they have right now is you have a EU-centric Biden administration, which is effectively an Obama administration. And I believe firmly that Obama is a foreign agent that works for the European globalists that want to that want to run the whole table on us. I believe that. I believe he's a communist. It's never stopped from when he was in college. I believe that he was the original Manchurian candidate. To me, Obama is the perfect example of what it looks like when you have a traitor running your country, and then Joe Biden is just a placeholder, propped up on stims that they throw out there, and every once in a while to mumble his way through a 3-minute press conference, and then we go right back to having Obama run the show behind the scenes. And so the big question then is, will things improve if the United States is able to overthrow this junta and reinstall Donald Trump? That's a good question. I don't have a good answer for you. I think it's possible. I'm not saying that Donald Trump is great, but he's certainly a damn sight better than Biden, Obama. And he would certainly back, if Ireland decided they wanted to go their own way, I know Trump would back that. He would back Obama leaving the EU. He would back Italy leaving the EU. He understands. He does understand the threat of the European Union, and he does understand the threat of the United Nations, and all of these effectively globalist institutions, which we nominally were always in charge of, but not really. You know what I mean? But we've been a captured pawn on the battlefield politically for a long time. And, that's the problem. And what you're seeing in the United States now is the very, very early stages of a counter revolution against that. It started with the Federal Reserve. It started with getting control of the monetary policy. Once you have that, you can eventually affect the political change, especially if the political arena gets so crazy that everybody just stands up and goes, "What are you doing? We're being invaded. We're not," like all the things that you're seeing in the news, right, about the U.S. Well, that's a policy. That's not just, these aren't just random events. This is policy, and it's policy designed to destroy us. And the only way Europe is going to be able to, go through the plan I just outlined for you and survive is if the United States goes first. And then, but the real issue is that then there's the Chinese sitting back going, "You know what? I'll just catch all that capital. I'm ready for it." And what the goal originally was to destroy the entire West and move all the money to China. Think of these people like locusts. They come in, they destroy a field full of wheat, and then they eat up all the food, and then they move from there to somewhere else. But they use their money is how they eat, and they dump all their money into a place, take it over, strip it of all its assets, and then move to the next place. That's how that's what they've done in Africa. That's what they've done in the Middle East. It's what they've tried. That's what they're doing now in the United States. There's a lot of what built the United States was European money that fled the sovereign debt crisis of the 1920s, 1930s. Built the industrial powerhouse that the United States was then built that industrial powerhouse that then used to fight the war in Europe in the 1940s with the ultimate goal of taking out the Russians. That was the goal. It failed. The Russians stood firm and wiped out Nazi Germany. Stalingrad really is the turning point of the 20th century.
Right. Okay.
From that perspective.
Yep.
I mean, there are many other perspectives here. That's not. I hate that I don't want to be reductionist about this. I'm not trying to be reductionist. I'm trying to just provide one avenue of analysis. There are many other ways of looking at this, but I think that's from this power politics perspective. I think this is the right framework.
But the points that you make, Tom, aren't ones that you're going to find in the mainstream media. And the thing that, because I've been following your work for, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years or something, just noticed your skill and proficiency in mapping out like the large, massive board game. He's a really great strategic board gamer. So that's what he does. Michael, is there anything else you want to say or ask before we finish up?
And also, it's very interesting. The whole derivatives thing is a very disturbing aspect of world finance to me. And just I suppose that when you think the crash will come, I mean, when is the unspeakable substance going to hit the fan? What sort of time? I mean, everybody says this is imminent, but they've been kind of saying that. I mean, I certainly got very frightened around 2010, 2012. I felt we were going to be facing food riots at that situation, but in that stage, but it didn't materialize then. People sort of managed to get on. With major debts, and there was a serious hit in people's standards of living and property values and so on and so forth. But there wasn't the collapse that a number of people thought was imminent at that stage. Do you think it's imminent now, or would you be brave enough to put a timescale on it? Or
I am now, and I'll tell you why. We're much closer to it than we were then, and the reason for that is the following: in 2010, and I didn't understand this then, so don't think that I was like I figured this stuff out. Oh, I know what he's doing. It's nonsense. And normally I swear like a sailor. I'm trying to keep it clean because I don't know you very well. Which is that no worries. Which is that bullshit. No, I didn't know any of this stuff. Right. What I know now is that we had the balance sheet room. The central banks could all take a lot of the rotten debt on their balance sheet and lever up the balance sheets of the central banks to their limit. We have now reached that limit. Okay, that's why the Fed is trying to shrink its balance sheet. That's why Lagarde is half-heartedly being forced to shrink her balance sheet. She doesn't want to. She just wants to default. Powell knows that if the United States defaults, we lose our one superpower, which is that we've never defaulted on our debt in 40 plus years. That's our superpower. The dollar has never been defaulted on. We paid every coupon payment of every QSIP we've ever put out, right? Of every treasury bond we've ever issued. That's important. That's what's driven, even what amount of trust there still is for the United States is still based in that. Okay, we cross that Rubicon, the game is over. I mean, that's it. I
mean, that does seem to be happening with the development of BRICS, though. I mean, what you're saying is the reserve currency status. I mean, and that's. I remember that being spoken about very significantly back in 2008, 2012, that the United States is going to lose its reserve currency status.
And it is, and by degrees, it's happening.
That does seem to be being put in place now with the whole BRICS thing and the gold-backed currencies, that Saudi are interested in, and that Russia is interested in.
But I will say, yes, you're absolutely right. Back then, U.S. Treasuries made up, I think, 71 to 72% of global reserves.
Mm-hmm.
Today, it's under 58%. I remember having an argument with a friend of mine in 2012, arguing this exact point, and I made a bet with him. I lost this bet by 2 quarters, by the way, and that bet was by 2020, the share of American foreign exchange reserves, U.S. Treasury foreign exchange reserves, would be under 60%. That didn't happen until the second quarter of 2020. I said by 2020, and if I'm wrong, I owe you a bottle of whiskey. Your choice. That includes like a 15-year Macallan. Like I was putting a lot on the line here, right? So, or 60. In his case, it would have been a 16-year Lagavulin. And no, seriously, like, oh my God, right? Like today, that's a $200 bottle of whiskey. I'm like, no. But and back then I didn't have two nickels to rub together or a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. And so when I'm, when you make a bet like that, you're like, oh, Am I going to be right about this? And I was effectively right about it. Today, it's dying by degrees. But I also think that Powell understands this and wants it to happen. He doesn't want the reserve currency status anymore. He understands it's a burden we can no longer pay for. It's destroyed and hollowed out the country. It's destroyed and hollowed out, honestly, the manufacturing base of the entire world in many respects. And it's pushed the global economy into a weird, malinvested cycle of conspicuous consumption and a variety of other things that are at the heart of some of the criticisms of what is quote unquote today modern capitalism. No argument here. And I say this as a hardcore anarcho-libertarian, right? But the problem for everybody now is that the BRICS are going to do what they're going to do because they have to. The Powell and the Fed, I think, are okay with this. The people caught in the middle are the Europeans because they have no collateral, and the euro has now no chance of replacing the dollar as the world's reserve currency because they went to the negative bound and destroyed their bond market. And so the Chinese are just sitting back, accumulating gold, managing their balance sheet as best they can. They're gonna, they'll go through boom busts and allow property to be liquidated, and all they have to do and just manage it while they manage the rollout and the trust in and Chinese government bonds, which is coming, and it's going to come along slowly, and built by degrees on a strong foundation of global trade and honoring your contracts. And the longer that the United States acts the way we are acting, the more people are going to believe that we don't honor our contracts. So it's incumbent upon us that we get through this political crisis and this fiscal crisis with some of that intact so that we can still lead and be an antipode to China. After all this insanity is over, the Russians actually want this because the Russians don't want to be, the gas station that supplies China. Right? So the Russians are absolutely looking at this in a long-term strategic sense of not wanting the United States to make the wrong choice. Europe, on the other hand, is dead set on trying to get everybody to make, other than them, to make the wrong choice so that they can make the wrong choice and everybody loses and they win. That's the European game is really one of, it's like a de minimis race to the bottom. And they want to get there first and then having just more stuff than everybody else to rebuild that much faster than everybody else. And then all the capital flows to them. Then they get to set all the rules. That's their goal. That's their plan. And it's a stupid plan because it invites unbelievable amount of chaos and uncontrollable variables and, basic human nature and common sense and all the rest of it. But so if I have a message to the people of Ireland is do your best to just stay the course and, be ready at a moment's notice to strike when the opportunity arises for you to regain your sovereignty. And that's what you, as if I were advising an upstart political party, I would be, because I've done libertarian politics here in the United States. That's what I would recommend. I would just say, look, these are the issues. This is what people are trying. This is what they're trying to do. We need locally to keep our community strong, stay, relatively unangry with each other over the stupid crap that they put in front of us, because those aren't the real issues. The real issues are they're trying to bankrupt us all and take all our stuff. Yeah. And we don't want to let that happen.
Of course, yeah. Of course. But if the US loses the reserve currency, it won't be able to, the petrodollar will be gone.
The petrodollar is already dying.
You think so? Yeah, but I mean,
it's already dying. Yeah, no, it's already dying, and that's fine. There's nothing really wrong with that. We don't need the petrodollar. It's going to be petrogold, by the way. Gold is going to be the settlement currency gold will be the effective settlement currency for oil going forward.
Okay,
once the world breaks up into blocks.
So how is the petrodollar dying? Is it because more and more trade is happening outside of the petrodollar?
Yes.
Okay. You got oil for
and then ultimately it'll be the gold. It'll be the number of barrels of oil that you can buy with an ounce of gold that will matter. Well, watching that ratio will tell you what's happening.
Is that quoted at the moment? I mean, the gold hasn't really moved a hell of a lot over the last
20% in the last 3 months. I would say that's 20% in dollar terms. It has. In yen terms, it's more than that.
Let's say over the last 5 or 6 years, or last 10 years. That's really
but I mean, we. In the long run average, like the peak in 2011 was an overshoot, just as much as the trough in December 2015 at $1,000 was an undershoot. Realistically, gold is it depends on where you want to go. 50 years ago, when we went off the gold standard, it was $35 an ounce. Then it was then at Brown's bottom, it was $250 an ounce. Then at the top of the bottom of the Greek sovereign debt crisis, it was $1,000 an ounce. Now it's $2,300 an ounce. I mean, it's going to be a negotiated settlement where gold is going to wind up, and that's a different. I think that's beyond the scope of the discussion for today. Happy to have another conversation with you later, but I think you have to run, and I think it's probably a good place for the stop here. But we have, and there's many and many other issues to discuss here. But understand that I've got all that mapped out too. So
you didn't quite answer my question about a time scale, a likely time scale for the
No, it's going to be somewhere between the end of the decade. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, right, Michael. I tend to filibuster. I think that we're going to be looking at a new Bretton Woods by the end of the decade.
Okay.
And I think not soon enough. That's the problem.
No, that's the other. Yeah, I agree with you, Rich. But we're going to drag this out for as long as we can because we had the balance. We don't have the balance sheet room now. So now that we've hit the peak, we're on the. It's going to be a slow. It's going to be the Hemingway thing. How did you go broke? Slowly and then all at once. How's the faith in the global financial system going to go? Going to collapse slowly and then all at once.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, nice to talk to you, folks. I got a dash for
absolutely. Thank you for showing up, Michael. I appreciate enjoy and good luck to you in June.
Thanks very much. I have all the links in the description below. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.